Hey everyone, we're already in mid-February, which means it's time to finally dive into the January book of the month, Boy Mom by Ruth Whitman. If you are a paid subscriber to my Substack, you'll receive my parenting guide detailing how I'm applying insights from this book. But today I want to share my thoughts, what resonated with me, what challenged me, and how it connects to my experiences as both a mom to two boys and a former middle school counselor. Beyond just the book, I also want to talk about the bigger picture. What does it really mean to raise boys today? There's a quote that I heard before reading this book that really stood out to me and stuck with me. And that was that it's not that our girls are harder to raise, it's that our boys are easier to neglect. And at first, that felt harsh, but the more that I sat with it, the more I saw truth in it. Boys are often given more leeway early on. They aren't always encouraged to express emotions the way that girls are. And because they might seem quote unquote fine on the outside, they can slip under the radar. But are they really fine? Are we giving them what they truly need? And so today we're going to talk about friendships, academics, emotional expression, and everything in between. I was excited to read Boy Mom, not just for my own boys, but because of what I've observed in my years working with schools. And over time, I have grown more concerned about our boys. And so while there has been a rightful focus on empowering girls, I've noticed that our boys are struggling in unique ways that aren't always being addressed. I think these countless resources that we have that are really meaningful and based on data for our girls, we are seeing the benefit. We are seeing our girls attending college more frequently, moving out, finding meaningful relationships, finding careers, and just overall, really in terms of adult life, thriving. And then what we are seeing for our boys is that we really don't have a lot of resources for boys that are talking to them about how to express emotions, how to make friendships. We're seeing boys really struggle in K-12 schools, not going on to graduate from college as much. And we are also seeing a failure to launch with boys, where we're having more and more boys living at home and video games and really not holding down jobs. So we're seeing a lot of challenges that boys are currently facing. And I don't think we have developed the resources yet to meet these challenges and really support our kids. And so this book does talk about the challenges and the data support it. So how they're shaped by school, technology, and cultural expectations, as well as deeper issues like emotional expression and masculinity. And one thing that influenced how I interpreted this book is my own upbringing. So the author, Ruth Whitman, she was raised in a very strongly feminist household. And she was initially worried about raising boys because she was worried that it was going back to this toxic masculinity, and that's all that seems to be available for boys. But my background is very different. So when my parents divorced, my dad became my primary parent, raising me alongside my older brother. And so I watched my dad model emotional expression. You know, he went to therapy, he journaled his experiences, and he had close friendships. And so while my dad was not perfect, and there was definitely a lot of room to grow as a dad raising a daughter, his example really showed me that boys and men can be emotionally expressive, connected, and nurturing. And so this is why I push back against the idea that boys can only be tough or angry. You know, boys are whole humans with emotions and friendships and deep connections. And I think we've sold our boys short, and now we're starting to see those consequences. So one point that the book makes that I wholeheartedly agree with is that boys start out highly emotional and deeply in need of nurturing. We know that boys' brains develop differently from girls, but they also tend to be more physically affectionate and emotionally expressive when they're young. I've seen this firsthand with my own kids. You know, my daughter is naturally independent. She wants to do things on her own, but my boys, they constantly seek physical and emotional connection. Yes, it could be through wrestling, but it could also be through snuggling on the couch or needing reassurance, getting hugs, getting high fives, talking about what's going on. But yet as boys grow, society really starts to send them a different message. Somewhere in elementary or middle school, they begin to hear that they need to, man up or suppress their emotions and be strong. And yet as adults, we value men who are emotionally available, supportive, and communicative, qualities we often discourage in them as kids. And this contradiction is something that we as parents, I think, need to be mindful of. And as I go through this episode today, I'm going to say boys and girls, and I know I'm being really general in terms of the groups that I'm discussing, but I hope that you can still follow along and take something away from today. So middle school, we're talking about ages 11 to 14, and this is a time of rapid development, second only to early childhood of 0 to 3. So while you may be listening to this today and you have a 6-year-old boy, I do think all this information is still so important to hear because 11, it really isn't that far away, right? And so having worked with hundreds of middle school boys, I've seen firsthand the drastic transformations from 6th to 8th grade. Boys are typically very different kids in 6th grade versus 7th grade versus 8th grade. You could have a boy come in at 4'8" and leave in 8th grade at 6'2". And there is just so much growth that is happening. And that boy who is 6'2" might be unable to organize himself, might still pick his nose. Like the physical side of development does not match the maturity and the brain development, right? And that's something that I do see actually impact our boys quite a bit, is we often put a lot of pressure on our really tall, more mature looking boys, and we let things slide a lot with our shorter, younger looking boys. And I see that in our girls just in a different way too. But one thing I've constantly noticed is also how different our boys are one-on-one versus in a group. I've had deep, insightful conversations with boys in my office, conversations where they're vulnerable, they're self-aware, and open about their friendships or their struggles. And I would see this as well, even when their parents are in the rooms. But then when they're at the lunch table or when they're in the classroom setting, they appear so confident, and they might be not following the rules or roughhousing, acting like they don't care. And so there's this intense pressure to conform to a certain image of boyhood when they're in a group, which can really stifle their ability to express themselves authentically. I remember leading a boys group where we talked about what it meant to be like in during middle school. And the boys had a very specific checklist. And this was a while ago, but it was gel your hair, wear khakis, and talk about sports. Those were like 3 of the things. And so it was a really clear social script, which I think is really similar to a girl's experience. But we don't often acknowledge that boys also face these pressures. They face pressures of wanting to fit in based on how they dress or with their bodies. And I think it's easier for us to say, no, that doesn't matter for our boys, where we would probably go to great lengths to go shopping with our girls, or make sure that they feel like they're proud of the way that they look and they appear. And so in our efforts to really move away from toxic masculinity, I've noticed that sometimes the pendulum has shifted the whole other way, where now we're overcompensating by coddling our boys in ways we wouldn't with girls. And so it might not be, toughen up, shut it down, but it's almost like we have really lowered our expectations for boys. We tend to hold girls to higher expectations for responsibility, organization, and emotional intelligence, while excusing certain behaviors in boys with sayings like boys will be boys mindset. And this does them a huge disservice. We need to find a balance, offering support and emotional validation while also holding them accountable and equipping them with the skills to thrive. Our boys are very capable. And sometimes I feel like, we make them out to be like they're constant 6-year-olds when they are adolescents. And so boys need to be taught life skills, just like our girls. They should learn how to cook, clean, manage emotions, be aware of other people, take responsibility for their actions. We wouldn't excuse a girl running around the classroom or hitting someone. So why do we sometimes brush it off when it's a boy? And one of the biggest areas where boys, I think, need additional support is with executive functioning. So these are skills like organization, time management, and emotional regulation. In my experience, boys often need explicit instruction and reinforcement in these areas. They also need to learn by, yes, that explicit instruction, they need to learn by doing, but they also need to learn by making mistakes and failing. So what can we do? What does all this mean for us as parents? And first of all, I do want to say, I could make this episode about 30 minutes longer because I have so many thoughts on our boys and how to support them. And so reach out to me if you would love to connect more. I will put my email as well in the show notes, so that way we can connect and keep this conversation going. But here are a few things that I think no matter what age your son is or a boy that you know, that we can really help support them. And that is one, to be intentional about emotional expression. Let's let our boys know that they are more than just being angry and sad. There's a much wider range of emotions and feelings that they can experience. Normalize our boys talking about their experiences. So find a way that they can feel comfortable doing this, whether it is, a lot of times what I would notice with boys is that they either needed to be physically moving, so going and taking a walk, playing basketball. They need to be touching something like playing with kinetic sand, so not making direct eye contact with me in order to feel safer to talk. So providing opportunities like that, or maybe it's journaling and they write to you how they feel, or drawing. Again, just providing these different ways to connect with them. We need to hold boys to the same expectations as girls. Yes, they might be, 2 years developmentally behind our girls, but we need to teach them responsibility, self-regulation, and self-care. We can't assume that they'll figure it out. When it comes to these executive functioning skills, we have to be directly teaching them and giving them exposure to try it out and figure what works out for them. Because I think a big reason as to why our boys are really struggling in school is because they don't have this foundation of executive functioning. And so if you don't know how to have sustained attention during a classroom setting, emotional regulation, organize your materials, time management, school is really hard, because that's what a lot of school is executive functioning. And so we really need to not only hold our boys the same expectations, but we need to be explicitly teaching them these skills as parents and at school. We also need to recognize social pressures. Let's help boys navigate peer expectations while staying true to themselves. Just like my dad did for me, he modeled that boys can have meaningful friendships, what it's like to push yourself out of your comfort zone, how to connect with things other than just sports when it comes to boys. And I think we need to look at what are we modeling for our kids in terms of at home, but also what are the stories that we're reading to our kids? What are they watching on TV? Is it only about boys who hate school or are only friends with superheroes? Let's try to find just like some everyday friendships that we can model for our boys to see how they can have healthy relationships. Because when we can have healthy relationships with friends, that then leads to healthy relationships as you get older and want more of those like dating relationships. I truly believe that raising emotionally aware, confident, and capable boys, it starts with us, their parents. And it's not just about raising good boys on the outside. It's about raising men who are confident, capable, compassionate, independent, and aware of others, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out to you? What challenges have you experienced in raising boys? And let's keep this conversation going. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Lessons from the Middle.